Hello, and welcome to our presentation on disability in children's library materials for the diversity audit. My name is Daniel Kilkelly.
My name is Rita Baldwin.
I'm Avery Brayland.
And I am Erin Abel.
And we're going to give an introduction on disability representation. It's not meant to be a comprehensive core collection, but just some ways to improve the representation in the collection.
So our group was focused on looking for disability representation within the collection that we looked over, and that would be the collection of the ISLA School Library. So the books that we were looking at included picture books, chapter books, beginning readers, and graphic novels for ages K through elementary school. So once we ended up looking over all of the books that were fictional and no duplicates, we looked over a total of 6,184 books altogether.
Alrighty, so a little background about the school that we looked at, which was ISLA. So it's a pre-K through fifth grade Spanish immersion community. They were founded in 2007 by four women. 9.7% of the students receive special education services. And then a little bit about the ISLA library in general is that their collection is separated in half between Spanish and English. It is volunteer run because they haven't had a librarian in a few years. Most books are acquired through donations. And then the cataloging system does hold errors just because it is more volunteer run, so there's less of a standard way on doing things.
During the diversity audit, we organized things into five broad categories within which there were subcategories. The first category was physical disability, such as biological limb difference or amputation, impaired movement requiring assistive technology. The second category was communication disability, which we defined as including blindness, deafness, being hard of hearing, or nonverbal. The next category was neurodivergence and mental health, including but not limited to autism, ADHD, Tourette's, anxiety and depression, dyslexia, auditory processing disorder, and dysgraphia. Then there is chronic illness, which includes but is not limited to arthritis, asthma, heart disease, epilepsy, and diabetes. And our last category is invisible or other, which is kind of a catch-all for anything that didn't fit into the above categories, but still affected a character's ability to participate in activities of daily living due to disability.
So again, to reiterate what Erin said, we reviewed 6,184 books when we adjusted for duplicates and nonfiction items. Of those over 6,000 items, only 73 items had disability representation. That is 1.2% and significantly below the 25%-ish that the CDC states is the United States percentage living with disability. So physical disability was represented with 10 books, communication disability was represented with 26, neurodivergence and mental health were apparent in 24 books, chronic illness in 8, and invisibility or other were 13. Again, these categories were evaluated based on the descriptions available for the books online, as well as any tags that they might have had in their online listings.
So, looking at the statistics for the collection, it's pretty apparent that all categories that we identified need additions to fill the gap in this collection. So, in an ideal world, we would want to increase books in each category to overall meet the CDC's estimation on the percentage of people with disabilities, but that is pretty much impossible because of budgeting and the availability of books with strong representation. Our goal is to get the percentage of the books in this collection up to 9.7% for disability representation. We chose this number because it matches the percentage of students who utilize special education services. 9.7 is still an underrepresented number as special education is only a select amount of people, and it wouldn't include those without IEPs or those who have physical disabilities but don't require special education. We also understand this may take a lot of time to build this collection up to meet the goal. So, how do we do it? How do we get the representation up to this number? Well, considering the library runs primarily on donations and volunteers, I can imagine our budget is pretty small to non-existent. So, we've thought about this and decided that grant writing and directly asking donors for the specific titles we recommend later in the presentation is the best way to go.
So looking at each individual category, we came up with some recommendations for adding to the collection. So looking at the books that had physical disability representation in this diversity audit, which we defined as biological limb difference or amputation, impaired movement requiring assistive technology. We found that most of the books that fit into this category had characters in wheelchairs. Few, if any, had characters with other limb difference or impaired movement. So I wanted to have a couple that had different representation. So I picked out a couple of books to recommend to add to the collection. There's Fooled by Susan Haas, which is about a girl in a wheelchair and has more of a magical setting. Bionic Boy is about a character who has a prosthetic limb. There's Adventurous Adeline. Wheelchair Rugby Rush has someone in a wheelchair participating in sports. The Avon Green series is really interesting because it's about a girl that doesn't have arms participating in all sorts of activities. This one is about music. Lumbering Giants of Windy Pines by Mo Netz, and The Chance to Fly by Ali Stroker.
So we ended up defining communication disabilities by grouping up blindness, deafness, hard of hearing, and nonverbal. So basically, we were looking at disabilities that would potentially affect the ability to read or talk to one another. So a majority of the books that were already in this collection featured blind characters. And there was one book each with a character with deafness, muteness, and someone who was hard of hearing. So some recommendations that I think could fit well into this collection. First up, we have Butterfly on the Wind by Adam Pottle, which is about a girl finding confidence through the support of the deaf community. Then we have The Moonlight Zoo by Maddie Powell Tuck, which is about a little girl looking for her cat. Then we have Cesaria Feels the Beat, which is about a little deaf girl who describes how she feels the music to dance. And then looking for books about blindness, we have A Day with Amelia, which is basically just a day with a little blind girl. A Tip Off for All, which is about a little boy saving the day when the power goes out. Patricia's Story, which is about a little girl with nice stigmas and how she goes about her day. And then the last one is Marshmallow and Peter, which is about a blind boy about the from the point of view of his walking stick.
Regarding neurodivergence and mental health disability, there were several books that have characters with dyslexia, anxiety, depression, and ADHD represented in the ISLA collection already. But there was only one book with a character with autism, one with Down syndrome, and one with an eating disorder. So there were a lot of disabilities that were underrepresented or poorly represented within the current collection. Some suggestions I have for adding to the collection include The Compulsion Cloud, which is about a girl who has OCD. The Beach is Loud is about a child with autism, but also experiences sensory processing disorder. My sister Lily, who doesn't have autism, is from the perspective of a boy who has autism and the way he sees the world, and his sister, who does not. Huepa by J. de la Vega is a bilingual Spanish and English book that represents ADHD. And How Are You, Verity by Megan Wilson Duff and Taylor Barham is about a non-identified neurodivergent student who is confused as to why people keep asking how she is instead of just saying hi, which is what they are actually trying to communicate to her. The Curiosities has a Filipino representation and is a good representation of Tourette's. And the Worry Balloon represents anxiety.
Alrighty, so the chronic illness category had the fewest books in the ISLA collection. It had two with allergies, one about diabetes, one about cerebral palsy, one about narcolepsy, and then there were several undefined or just weren't labeled in a way we could find them or find out what specifically was the chronic illness in as the topic. So the few that I chose to integrate into this collection is Chrissy's Life with Lupus, about a little girl with lupus. I have asthma. What does that mean? The Abilities in Me, congenital heart defect, talking about a little girl and her life going through day to day with her congenital heart defect. Life with Spina Bifida, Vote for the Goat, which is about a juvenile girl who has arthritis. Accidental Demons, that is about a girl who has type 1 diabetes, and it's also set in a fantasy or magical setting. And then Milo's Day at School, that is about a little boy with a seizure disorder.
So for invisible disability, we considered that as something that affects a character's ability to participate in the activities of daily living. So this category, by definition, ended up featuring many uncategorized or implied, as in not specifically stated disabilities. Um, Titles that were already in the ISLA collection included Alzheimer's and narcolepsy.
So a couple of the suggestions that we found were Mujang and the Lost Memories, which is about two girls who find three women suffering from dementia. Raven's Doll, a little girl showing her class a paper doll that is a representation of her mother who has fibromyalgia. And then How Many Marbles Do You Have is a good visual representation of chronic fatigue syndrome.
A Dog at the Zoo, a children's book about bringing joy to others, is part of a series that is from the perspective of a service dog. And Different, A Great Way to Be by Heather Avis and Sarah Masenga is about embracing what makes you different, be that your disability or your interest.
Another book we recommend is Lenny's Book of Everything, which is about a character who has a rare form of gigantism, and Gut Reaction, which is about a young girl who likes to bake but finds that it's making her increasingly ill and doesn't know how to tell people.
And the last title for this collection is Little Imperfections, A Tall Tale of Growing Up Different, which is about a boy growing up in a family that has dwarfism.
So again, these were a few suggestions that we have. It is certainly not a comprehensive list of titles that we suggest. Many more would be needed to bring us up to that 9.7% that we are looking for to represent disability within the ISLA collection. Some of the works we looked at in order to make this presentation include the CDC's infographic regarding disability in the United States, as well as the ISLA website. So learning about the school from which the materials we're talking about were found.